Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 127 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm here talking with Andy Wilson of the Kiss Your Franchise Goodbye podcast.
Hi, Kurt.
Hey, Andy, how's it going?
Hi, good to be here. Good to be here.
So, other than your podcast that I've already mentioned, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Great. I live in the wonderful city of Austin, Texas. I've been a local film critic here for about 10 years, writing for various sites, the most recent two of which, Graphic Policy and Bleeding Cool, are both comics-focused websites, and I was just one of their film and TV guys who would go in. My reviews have tapered off a little bit post-pandemic. I think my most recent one that I have up is my review of The Batman from earlier this year on Graphic Policy. If you want to go check that out.
Very cool. So it sounds like you've been into comic book related things for a while. Do you read comics at all? Have you read comics?
I have been on and off with comics since I was a kid. My parents divorced when I was younger, and they ended up on different coasts, and so before I'd get on a plane every summer to go from one parent to the other, they'd load me up with comics. This was Claremont X-Men era, late 80s, early 90s, and that was mostly my jam. Pertinent to this, one of my more favorite collections that I got out of that was an X-Men versus Fantastic Four 4-issue series where She-Hulk was moonlighting as a member of the Fantastic Four, Ben Grimm having just only recently having returned from Battleworld after Secret Wars. So that's kind of how I know She-Hulk. And then I've kind of dabbled in and out just depending on what's going on. I'll usually show up for like a big event if it sounds really interesting and go pick up a few trades or something like that. But I am aware sort of what's going on in comics, but I'm not like the most avid reader.
Right. Unlike me, who is an avid reader, and although I got into comics a little bit late, I didn't get my first comic until I was 15.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But once I got in, I was hooked, and it's been a constant in my life ever since.
Just takes one. That's all you need.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's great.
So let's get talking about the She-Hulk show. This is the first episode, and it's titled A Normal Amount of Rage.
A normal amount of rage.
Yes.
A great title. I love it. I think it encapsulates a lot of what this episode is really all about.
Yeah, and I think the very first line encapsulates a lot of what the show is going to be about.
Right.
We get Jen looking straight into the camera, which is already kind of playing with the fourth wall a little bit.
Yeah.
Although we learn soon she's not addressing us at that moment. But she looks straight into the camera and asks, what is the responsibility of those with power?
Mm-hmm.
Which, like I said, I think is going to be one of the kind of ongoing themes of this series. Because Jen really doesn't want to be responsible for her power, as we'll see throughout the episode.
Yeah.
And, of course, it's also a great play on the classic Spider-Man line, with great power must also come great responsibility.
Right. And it's the perfect ironic twist, as you said, because, this is the Joseph Campbell hero's journey when the hero is called to adventure and then they refuse the call.
Right.
And they walk away for a moment, and then that makes them have to come back so that becomes more epic. And, this is the first episode of that, but I think it's giving us the stakes of, what Jennifer Walters wants out of life. She wants to be a lawyer. She wants to be a normal person. This happened to her by a complete freak accident, but she's not really taking in the gravity of, what her cousin Bruce is telling her.
Mm-hmm.
Which, one of the things I thought was interesting that they didn't really go into here, they made a big deal about how he destroyed their blood samples, but at no point does Bruce ever tell Jennifer, hey, people are going to be coming after you all the time because they want the Hulk. They want those powers. They want your blood.
Yeah, he kind of hints towards that a little bit with just a line that we'll get to in a little while about how weird things just kind of happen to you when you're a Hulk. But yeah, he doesn't specifically warn her like, hey, your blood is now this MacGuffin that anyone is going to be after you for at any time.
Like, watch out for Thunderbolt Ross. He's going to come knocking on your door. Doing some tests on you. Yeah.
But sticking with the opening scene, I love how it establishes Jennifer at that moment and what her character is like and some of her history. You get little things in the background like her UCLA pendant and diplomas, which is accurate to the comics. Jen is a Bruin. As a former SoCal guy, I have to give a shout out there to UCLA. And we also see like her little RBG bobblehead and things like that. And so we get all of that with just like the production design and, with Dennis, her co-worker.
Oh, Dennis.
Kind of mansplaining what she's doing right and doing wrong when she's doing absolutely fine.
And he's giving her notes during it. I didn't notice this until the second time around. But he's like, smile more. Smile. And you're like,
yeah.
Oh, you bastard.
Yeah. I know that Jen is not going to be staying in the district attorney's office, so I'm guessing we're not going to get a whole bunch more of Dennis, but I do hope we get some sort of comeuppance sometime down the line.
It would have been nice to see Titania just like, I don't know, suplex him or something. Like, that would have been kind of funny.
And she's got her best friend Nikki there, who's also her paralegal. And a little reference I noticed, Nikki says, close it off with a savage Jen Walters look. And originally, She-Hulk's first book was called The Savage She-Hulk.
Right.
So it's those little things that are nice little Easter eggs for those of us who are familiar with the comics, but naturally fit into the flow of the show anyways.
Yeah.
That I think is the perfect level of reference.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It's a nice, I mean, that's the touch of the MCU. There's it's a little bit of fan service, but if you're new to the show, my baseline is always my wife. She's never read a comic book, but she's seen all the movies, and if it works for her, then it works for everybody. And this is definitely like on her level.
Excellent. So she's watching the show with you, or?
She won't watch it yet. She is one of those who wants to wait until they're all out so she can binge them all at once.
Okay.
But I'm like, you have to watch She-Hulk. And she's like, I will. We'll do it in like 8 weeks. I'm like, okay. I'm like, but I told you with WandaVision, and I told you with Moon Knight, and you got to get on these. They're worth it.
Yeah, the binging versus weekly release is kind of an ongoing debate that fans are having right now.
Yeah.
And personally, I prefer the weekly release. I like having time between episodes where you can have the fan base doing a little bit of theorizing and discussion of what's to come before everything gets all revealed at once.
Yeah, I think it's better overall. I do think that the Marvel fandom needs to calm down just a little bit though. It's like, oh, it's Mephisto. This definitely means Mephisto showing up, and I'm like, you guys, it's not Mephisto. Calm down.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. No,
and then
I was
everybody's so disappointed when it's not, and it's Agatha Harkness instead, and I'm like, but that's so much better, you guys. Come on, like that's great.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was a little bit guilty of that on WandaVision,
Hmm.
but I think I've gotten it under control at this point. And yeah, I agree that thinking everything is going to lead into the X-Men or everything is a sign of Mephisto or
Oh, yeah.
whatever. Yeah, it's all it's going to come when it's going to come, and just relax.
And the X-Men and the Fantastic Four are big enough. They're not going to get revealed on one of these Disney Plus shows. As much as
Well,
I definitely want that, I don't know.
Well, we say that, but in the last show, we had our first mutant reveal.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, we did have a discussion about mutants in Ms. Marvel, and we did have Brie Larson show up at the end. So I do think overall, yeah, the week by week is better because the alternative, I mean, I remember the olden days when the Netflix series came out, and when Daredevil season 2 dropped or Luke Cage dropped, it was like, okay, you have to find 13 hours to get through all of this stuff. And then if something happens in like the last 2 episodes, then there's the people who were able to find 13 hours over the weekend and people who were not.
Right. And that it's really frustrating to either get spoiled or just decide you have to spend X amount of hours completely away from social media,
Yeah.
in case you will get spoiled.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think the weekly release is the better model for most things. But obviously there are pros and cons of each.
My Hulkness, I need more. I need it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there is definitely part of me that's like, why aren't the rest of the episodes available?
Give them to me.
But at the same time, having the opportunity to discuss each individual episode the way we're doing,
Yeah.
week by week, that's going to make it a lot of fun, I hope.
It's nice. Yeah, I really like it.
So now Jen finishes up her speech. She's about to leave. She comes back into the room, and we get our first official fourth wall break.
Hmm.
Now, as listeners know, if you're not a regular She-Hulk reader, you should still have listened to the last episode of the show where I'd discussed She-Hulk, and she is one of the original fourth wall breakers from the comics. She did that before Deadpool existed, and so it's great to see that here. But I really wonder how they're going to explain it, or if they're going to explain it.
I think that they know that this show is just built a little bit differently. And I want to talk about sort of the meta show for 1 second. The fact that the showrunner came over from Rick and Morty, and her big credit before this was the writer of the Pickle Rick episode, which
Right.
I love that episode. I think it's so brilliant. And I think that that is a choice. And I think they're just going to let it sort of be its own thing in the same way that the WandaVision episodes, they were weird. It's like, okay, here's the Modern Family, Malcolm in the Middle one, and she's talking directly to the camera. And that's just sort of normal. That's just okay. In the same way that the I Love Lucy and
Dick Van Dyke and
Dick Van Dyke ones were their own
Yeah.
thing as well. I really like that the MCU in Phase 4 has really become so many different things.
Mhm.
That's always been one of the main problems that people have with it is like, oh, all of these movies are the same. And I don't know, I feel like somewhere around like 2017, 2018, Feige and everybody had gotten the memo, and they're like, let's start making some really kind of weirder movies. And you got Ragnarok, which is very weird. You got Black Panther, which is very different. And now in the Disney Plus era, things are very, very, very different.
Yeah.
I think that's by design. I think that's a lot of fun, and I'm glad that they're sort of letting this be a comedy where Jennifer Walters is going to turn to the camera every once in a while and say, "He didn't mean that." It's great.
Yeah. But you did reference like the WandaVision stuff where she talks to the camera and all that sort of thing happens. But that is eventually explained.
Right.
It's all part of Wanda's altering of reality because of her love of sitcoms. And, she just keeps kind of moving it forward through the eras and reflecting those tropes. But there is that explanation there. So I'm hoping that we'll at least get some sort of revelation that tells us why She-Hulk is able to turn to the camera like that.
The Skrulls did it. I don't know. It'll be something like that.
Speaking of the Skrulls and other aliens, let's flash back to the car crash that causes Jen's powers, which the original comic book origin, Jen was shot by basically mobsters who wanted to prevent her from working on the case against them. And so her first kind of story arc deals with that. And I really like that they decided to go a completely different way. And rather than a shooting where there's a definite villain involved, it's just an accident.
Yeah.
And in this case, an accident involving a spaceship.
Which is hilarious. It's just like, I guess spaceships just show up in Mexico, like, trying to find the Hulk.
Well, it's like he says a little bit later in the show, and as we alluded to a little bit earlier, weird things just happen to you when you're a Hulk.
Yeah. So I like that change too. I also like it from sort of a modernization perspective because they're like, she's shot. She needs her cousin's blood to save her. And so he makes this horrible choice to like, well, I'd rather have her alive and with my blood, even though knowing that she might be cursed with it. The other part of it is it feels like there's a little bit more agency here. She's the one who gets out of the car first. She pulls Bruce from the car. She cuts her arm. It is an accident, but it's because she is making active choices.
Yeah.
And being a hero in her own right, even before she's a She-Hulk.
Right. I mean, Bruce even warns her away, saying, "Hey, get away! My I'm bleeding. Don't do this." But she does it anyway. I agree that I like making it more of an accident rather than having Bruce say, "Oh, only my blood can save her,"
right?
Because we're too far from a hospital or whatever. It doesn't make that much sense for a blood transfusion to be needed right at that very moment where, he's the only one who can do it. That would be stretching credulity too far. And so having it be just, their blood intermingles when, they're both bleeding, and so she takes a bit of a gamma burst from that. It makes a whole lot more sense, and like you said, gives her that agency of being the one to rescue Bruce.
And I like the reveal that we get just a few minutes later that, in fact, the commingling of their blood allows him to heal his arm after the effects of, surviving doing a snap with the Infinity Gauntlet.
Yeah.
So whatever Jennifer Walters has got locked in her DNA is separate and indelible from what Bruce Banner has, and maybe different. Maybe there's more there. I don't know. It'll be interesting to,
because she's better.
Because she's better, maybe. I don't know. Like, yeah, I like that.
I love that line. Although there was that thought in the back of my head of, yeah, that's not going to rile up the men's rights activists
gosh.
at all.
Those guys aren't even watching this though. They're just review
Oh,
bombing and
yeah, well, they're review bombing and maybe they're hate watching.
oh, maybe.
But yeah, the less said about those guys, probably the best.
Yeah, probably.
So moving forward in the show, Jen wakes back up after her first hulking out, and in the Moon Knight show, they hid some QR codes in the background where if you pause the episode and scan it, you get some free comics. And I like that they found a way to do that here as well, in a place that makes total sense, because on the wall of the bar, as part of the poster for Ladies' Night, there's a QR code there, and sure enough, if you scan it with your phone, you can get a free copy of Savage She-Hulk #1.
There we go.
Which is Jen's origin, written by Stan Lee and drawn by John Buscema.
That's right. I'm Stan Lee, and I came up with the She-Hulk. Because I didn't want the TV executives to make a She-Hulk. Only Smiling Stan could do that.
And, I totally see his point of view on that.
Totally.
If the TV show is going to come up with it and, have their own character, it's better for Marvel to have the full rights to a character like that themselves. Speaking of that character, let's get back to the show
She-Hulk,
itself.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the scene where she's in the bathroom and the other ladies come in and, are basically like, oh, we're going to mother hen you.
We're going to take care of you.
You're one of ours now.
Well, because, you got to look out for each other when you're at the bar. And especially if, she shows up in the bar bathroom and she's looking beat up. They're like, oh, holy cow. Nope.
Yeah. Who did this to you? We'll take care of you.
Yeah.
Here are shoes. Here's makeup. Here's a coat. We'll take care of you.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the camaraderie there.
And then you get the exact opposite as she's waiting outside and the guys who are trying to flirt with her. And then
yes,
you get the full female bar experience.
Yeah, unfortunate, but true.
Yeah.
And this is the first time we get to really see her Hulk out and, what she looks like as a Hulk. Because in the first instance, we only saw her kind of reflected against the car door.
Mm-hmm.
But now we actually see her face as she hulks out and screams at them, making them probably shit themselves.
I would. Jeez.
And then thankfully Bruce comes along right at that moment and knocks her down, and we again cut to black, where we wake up at the Tropical Beach Lab, where we're going to spend most of the episode.
Nice pad.
Oh, great pad. I enjoyed how there was that Iron Man helmet on display there, and just as Jen kind of reaches out for it and touches it, you can just hear a very brief bit of the Avengers theme in the musical score. I love those little musical touches that they put in. Like at the end of Miss Marvel when they talk about mutation, there was a brief
yeah.
And so here, you get the Avengers theme for a second as you see the Iron Man mask, and we find Smart Hulk down working in the lab. And I love from this dialogue and from Ruffalo's performance how you can feel him still mourning the absence of Tony.
It is rough on him to talk about it, and he doesn't really know what to do with it still. It's true, it's his science bro bud. And I like the thing where he said that they hung out a lot, and Tony mostly just talked about how much he hated Steve. And I'm like, man, this place has some complicated memories, I think.
Yeah.
That's rough. Yeah.
And it's interesting in the conversation here where he's talking about Tony giving him the lab and all that sort of stuff. And then a little bit later, when Jen starts saying, I want to be normal, just give me a device like you had, and Bruce saying, no, that's impossible, we can't do that, you have to stay here and learn how to be a Hulk like me. I kind of wonder if he's lying to himself a little bit, and if he's just so lonely that he's kind of making an excuse and wanting to keep Jen around for his own sake.
Yeah.
Even if he wouldn't admit that to himself consciously, it felt like that was part of his motivation there.
I go back and forth on this sort of idea of, is Bruce Banner really a bastard deep down? Or is he an okay guy? And there's an argument to be made on both sides, and I think there is part of this here where he is reaching out and like he feels bad, but he is like, well, this is my burden, this is how I've dealt with it, this is the only way to deal with it, and so my cousin has to actually follow in the same pathway that I did, because obviously this is the only way that this has to be sort of hidden, and then every once in a while you go and you do superhero stuff, but mostly you hide yourself in isolation. I don't know. I love Mark Ruffalo so much, and he's so inherently kind of charismatic that I don't want to believe that he's that sort of a bastard. Like, I don't 100% love the Incredible Hulk movie with Ed Norton, but you got a lot more of the like, oh, okay, Ed Norton Banner, he's kind of a manipulator, he's kind of a jerk, especially in the final end credits scene where he's hulking out on his own. It's like, okay, he likes this.
Yeah.
Ruffalo's taken it in a different path, and I think the one thing that I kept going back to in this is the title, A Normal Amount of Anger.
Rage. And
then his statement in Avengers, his big line, that's my secret, Cap, I'm always angry. So's she. And they're both on the same path.
Yeah, and she calls it out in the very next scene where they're testing how she transforms, and he says the triggers are anger and fear, and she points out those are like the baseline of any woman just existing.
Exactly.
So yeah, when I heard that line, I watched this 3 times. The first time as soon as it came out, and then the second time I watched it, I took notes. And then the third time was just right before we started our conversation so that I had it fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
And so when I was taking notes and she said that line, my notes here say, that's her secret. She's always angry.
Yep.
And sure enough, as soon as those blades come in at her, she transforms. And I found it interesting that at first we see her yelling and growling like a savage Hulk. But as soon as the immediate danger is past and Bruce starts trying to calm her, she's like, no, I'm fine. So even though by the end of the episode she's able to control her transformations completely, but I still think there is a bit of rage that she's going to need to acknowledge and control even more than what she says she can already, especially when you see those first few transformations where she just growls and yells, and for those first few moments acts like a Hulk rather than like Jen.
Yeah, and I think that's, to go back to the Joseph Campbell hero's journey thing, this is the first step on that, is we're just learning what she's going to do. And this lays out a lot of different possibilities, and I'm really excited for where they're going to go.
Yeah, and one thing I have to say is I appreciate how we were able to get through basically her whole origin story in these first 37 minutes.
Oh yeah.
We don't have to spend an entire season of her getting her powers and deciding what to do with them and training and or anything like that. Basically, by the end of the first episode, we understand who she is, where she is, how she got here, and we're ready to go on with the show.
Yeah.
The fun lawyer show, as she told us.
Yeah, I like that. I didn't mind the slower burn of Ms. Marvel, where she's really learning all of that, or with Moon Knight, because there's so much more to explore. But like this, I really like getting right into it. She's in control. She's a boss, and we're just going to move forward. So the show is not going to be about learning to use her powers, although maybe it is. Maybe there's more that she has to learn to control. But I think it's going to be about living in that duality of like being a superhero and wanting to have the like normal life.
Yeah.
Which is what I understand that run of the comics that Dan Slott did is sort of like.
Yeah, Dan Slott's run, John Byrne's run, and Charles Soule's run are really the blueprint for what I think the show is about. I follow Dan Slott on Twitter, and he posted an interview with Kevin Feige where Kevin Feige specifically said, you know, we want that Dan Slott feel from his run in this show. And he's like, you know, when Kevin Feige calls you out as being the template, you're having a good day.
Yeah.
So that Dan Slott run is definitely one of my personal favorites. And yeah, how much time we need to spend on an origin really depends on the character. It totally makes sense for Miss Marvel, who is a teenager, and her story is about becoming comfortable with who she is. You know, that we're going to spend more time on that part of the story. Or Moon Knight, where it's a mystery. What's happening to me? You know, what's going on? Why am I like this? That makes sense, again, to hold back a lot of that origin. But yeah, She-Hulk is happy with who she is. And so we get just a brief, hey, here's how I got here. Let's have fun.
Yeah. Let's drink giant margaritas and talk about Captain America.
True. Although, before we get to either of those, you know, we finally get Jen agreeing to train. She finally, you know, she says, okay, teach me how to Hulk, please. And Bruce tries to start her off right in the deep end with dialectical behavioral therapy, which I had to look up because I'm familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, which it turns out dialectical behavioral therapy is an actual therapy that's used for borderline personality disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other similar mental health conditions. Unfortunately, they only show kind of a topside view of it by just showing like the meditation yoga aspect of it. There's definitely a lot more to it than just that. But Jen is still not really taking it seriously at this point. So we kind of skip over learning any more about that. And instead, we just get a training montage.
It's the everything you can do, I can do better sequence.
Yes.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of it, we get her woken up by the air horn, and we get the actual title of the episode called out at that moment there. He's like, you know, no uncontrollable amounts of anger or rage, and no, a normal amount of rage.
Yep. That's so good.
Which,
it's like, oh, she said the line, but like, also that is a really funny joke.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. That one and the post-credit scene are the moments that even on the third time through, I was still laughing at.
Yep. Yeah.
Because they were just so perfect in that moment.
Well, and again, Bruce Banner being kind of a bastard. Like I'm gonna show her she's not in control by waking her up with an air horn, which like would be bad to do to anyone, but
Oh,
to a
yeah,
Hulk?
no. Even just the sound of a loud truck passing by, and I startle out of bed and am miserable for at least the next 15-20 minutes while I get my brain and body back together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, an air horn right to the ear is, yeah, that's a bastard move.
Yeah.
Or as she points out, a dick move.
A dick move, yeah.
uh, and the relationship between these two, the interplay between them, they really feel like siblings,
Right.
or, in this case, close cousins who have known each other since they were little kids, and sometimes, that picking on each other and being mean to each other, that still just kind of comes out. It's just part of who you are when you're with that person. And they portray that relationship perfectly, where, he'll push her off a cliff and she gives him the finger as she's falling, and then comes back up and is like, hey, dick move, stop it.
Yeah. So I have a weird question about their age difference.
Okay.
One, this is pure speculation here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that Jennifer was blipped. So she spent 5 years in nothingness, and Hulk aged about 5 years between then. But like the age difference between Tatiana Maslany and Mark Ruffalo is like 15 plus years.
I just looked it up as you were talking. There is an 18-year age gap between the actors.
So
now,
yeah.
That's between the actors. The characters could be moved to be closer to one another. And like you said, there could be the blip, which we know Hulk was around during the entire time.
Right.
And so if she missed those 5 years, that would explain 5 of a 13-year age difference.
Mhm.
And I know cousins who are literally a generation apart due to just the way the marriage timing and
Oh, sure.
having of kids, how that timing all worked out. I've seen cousins who are a full generation apart, even though they are not technically removed in generations if
Mhm.
you trace back their lineage.
So my question is, though, how old was Jennifer when Bruce got blown up by that gamma experiment and became the Hulk for the first time? I would guess she was like a pretty little kid.
It's possible. We don't know how long Bruce was the Hulk before the first movie.
Right.
At least I don't think we do. I don't think that was ever completely established. Like,
Definitely
this
not.
happens 2 years, 6 months, and 3 days after the experiment or anything like that. But at the same time, that was 2009.
Mhm.
So let's just for shits and giggles,
He says 15 years. He says it's been 15 years.
So, I mean, 15 years ago, she was 21. And that's even without a blip age.
Oh, okay.
So she could be... So 15 years ago, she could have been 26. Just going by the actress's age. And assuming that she blipped out.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So
then
that's
that's a little easier to swallow. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. No, I totally see Banner as being the older sibling who probably picked on her a lot when they were really young, and then as she became like a teenager and stuff, he kind of took her under her wing and was the friendly older brother to her.
There was probably some game recognizes game. He's like, oh, she's really smart. I'm really smart. Like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
make sure my cousin like does well. And
Apparently there's 3 smart people in the Banner Walters branch of the family. There's Bruce, Jen, and we hear the name Ched,
okay.
which I've never heard of Ched Banner or Ched Walters before, but he gets name called in the car ride.
Yeah.
It is now canonical. There is, although we don't know which side of the family he's on.
No, we
whether
don't.
he's a Banner or a Walters.
Yeah.
But he's out there, and he is apparently smart.
Yeah. At least they didn't like name check. Oh, cousin Amadeus Cho, or something.
Right.
Then
No.
that would have been weird.
No, it's not an established Marvel character
Right.
that they're trying to sneak in or anything like that.
Just Ched Banner, that guy. Download him on your Marvel Strike mobile game.
Which I play regularly.
So that clears up that age difference. No more problem with that. Good bird walk. Yeah.
Now, getting back to the show, we get the getting drunk, the belching contest between the two, and then we try the meditation once again. And again, at this scene, we get another refusal of the call, where Jen is like, I don't want to be a superhero. I want to go back to being a lawyer. And this is the first time that Bruce seems to say you can do both. You can there is a balance between what you want and what is. And here he kind of calls out, you have to control your emotions, especially your anger. And I'm just going to cut in her speech because these are not my words to say as a man. I'm just going to stay silent and let her words speak for herself.
Well, here's the thing, Bruce. I'm great at controlling my anger. I do it all the time. When I'm catcalled in the street, when incompetent men explain my own area of expertise to me, I do it pretty much every day, because if I don't, I will get called emotional or difficult, or might just literally get murdered. So I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you. So all of this just feels like projecting a lot of shit onto me.
Brilliant dialogue. Again, I mean, you can tell the writing team that they brought over, they do know what they're doing. Contrary to what Twitter was trying to pull earlier this week on
Yeah, thankfully my Twitter feed has been very positive, especially about that speech. I've been seeing a lot of people just saying, this is what I feel, and it's so great to hear that on screen. So kudos to Marvel for making sure that this show is not just starring, but also has women in charge behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
And I kind of feel bad thinking about it. I probably should have specifically asked for a woman to get a woman's point of view when talking about this show, but I'm glad to have you.
Well, thank you.
I mean, not a slight against you, but if I had been thinking about it more, I probably should have made sure to include a woman's perspective on this show.
I've got a friend who I think would do really well in here. I'll make a connection between you two and see.
Oh, that would be great.
And maybe she can sub in and out, or we can all join together. Because, I totally agree. But okay, you're absolutely right. Centering women's voices important. At the same time, I feel like when we're talking about issues of patriarchy or toxic masculinity or things like that, it's also up to you and me to do what we can with our bros, try and rein that in, to try and dismantle those things. And
definitely. That's how to be a good ally, is to call out the bad behavior as soon as you see it and say something.
Again, that's the dialectical approach, that you can hold two opposing ideas at once and have them in balance. That yes, let's bring in more women to this conversation, and we as men need to do more at the same time. So,
agreed.
Both are true. Yeah.
But let's go ahead and get back to the show itself. We see at this point that Jen is able to completely control her transformations. She can be a Hulk, she can be Jen, she can go back and forth at will. Something that even Bruce has never really been able to Sure, he can bring out the Hulk at any time he wants to,
Mm-hmm.
but going back to being Bruce is something that he's never been able to consciously do himself. The best he could do was merge the two together
Mm-hmm.
into the Smart Hulk.
Yeah.
So, as she points out, she's even a little bit better.
She is.
and she's ready to leave.
Mhm.
You know, she, again, I don't want to be a superhero. I'm gonna go be a lawyer. I can do that. I'll be fine. Of course, this being a superhero show, we have to have at least one fight scene. And this is where we get it, because Bruce just does not want her to go.
No.
And again, I think a lot of his motivation at this point is kind of selfish. He doesn't want to be alone again, and so he would rather fight her than be on his own.
Yep.
You know, so you get this fight, and I think there's a couple of moments where I think the effects were not quite at top tier
Agreed.
level,
Agreed.
but it was still fun choreography, and again really illustrated the relationship between the two, with the rolling around and the sucker punch and the dummy and lunkhead and
Mm-hmm.
all that. So it was a well done fight scene, even if it wasn't technically perfect.
And you can really tell the difference between the two character models. That, they've had 8-9 years to like perfect the look of the Ruffalo Hulk. And
True.
so it looks really seamless. But then all they have to do, because they spent all that money on that code and that algorithm and those models for Avengers Endgame, just import them right in here. But to do the same thing with Tatiana Maslany, it isn't quite there, and I think that's unfortunate. But I also don't expect them to spend as much money on She-Hulk as they did on Avengers Endgame.
That's absolutely fair and totally true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if She-Hulk is still an active character 8 years from now,
Right.
she probably will look completely seamless.
Right. I mean, if we end up with an A-Force movie with
Oh.
Carol Danvers and She-Hulk and
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, by then it'll be perfect. But
Yeah.
it's yeah, I don't know. I'm like, this is a streaming show. It's okay. I'm not gonna I don't know. Maybe I'm too easy to please. Well, no, I definitely am. I'm in the tank for Disney.
I think I said back in my Moon Knight deep dive, I said I'm an easy lay when it comes to enjoying superhero content of any sort.
We're both old enough to remember when we didn't have any of this. I recognize it's not perfect. It's not even optimal. I'm more interested in what the show is trying to do. If it's failing at some of the artifice, that's okay with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the characters and the story is much more important than the effects.
Yeah.
But anyway, after that fun fight, it ends with, as sibling fights usually do, when serious damage happens.
Right.
Because they accidentally break the bar.
Break the bar.
And my bar.
Mhm.
And so we cut to them fixing it back up. And technically, if you're going in story order, in chronological order, here's where we get the first fourth wall break.
Right.
Because the one that we saw before at the very beginning of the show was forward from
Right.
this, and then we flash back to here. So this is where she does that turn to the camera after he says, I'll totally respect you going and being a lawyer. And she turns and says, he didn't mean it.
And the look he gives too, he's just like, wait, what? Did she say
Yeah.
something? Who's she talking to?
Well, That's what I was kind of wondering. He gives kind of a very brief look. She does a double take, though.
Mm-hmm.
She does a complete double take where she's like, wait, did I just do that?
Yeah.
And so, again, I'd like to see a little bit more of the kind of progression of her fourth wall breaking and some sort of explanation as to why she does this.
It's me, Stan Lee, the Beyonder, making Jennifer Walters break the fourth wall.
You know, when the show was pitched, as I understand it, you know, the basic idea behind it is Ally McBeal, but with superheroes.
Yeah.
And
sense.
Ally McBeal, you know, if you go back and watch that show, she narrated it much of the time.
Mm-hmm.
She would not quite break the fourth wall. I don't think she ever actually turned to the camera and said things, but it definitely had that irreverent sort of playing with the fourth wall.
Right.
So even beyond the comic book influence, the lawyer show influence also has that. But like with Ally McBeal, there was always a little bit of, is Ally sane?
Right.
Is she fully, you know, is she really okay?
She's seeing the dancing baby dancing to Blue Swede, Hooked on a Feeling.
Right, yeah.
You know, yeah.
And so I think it'd be good for the show to get a little bit of that. And, you know, maybe her fourth wall breaking is her own personal kind of mental issues bringing themselves out, as Bruce has his multiple personality disorder, which is why he and the Hulk were two completely separate individuals, but maybe Jen has some sort of mild narcissistic disorder or something along those lines that would cause her to believe she is narrating her life to an audience.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but it's referred to as like the Truman Show disorder, where you do believe that like you're being observed at all times by people who are enjoying watching your daily life.
Yeah. When I was a kid, most kids had an imaginary friend. I had an imaginary audience.
Oh,
that
yeah,
I
nice.
would break the fourth wall to occasionally and narrate my life. So it's not unheard of, definitely.
Yeah. And I like that take on it because it goes to my grand theory of what Marvel Phase 4 is really all about, which is mental health and dealing with trauma on a massive worldwide scale. Every single one of these shows is at some level about dealing with trauma, because everybody has gone through this shared trauma of the blip and dealing with the impact of all of that. Hawkeye, WandaVision, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse.
And then even if it's not about the blip, Ms. Marvel, there's that intergenerational trauma.
Yep.
So yeah, it's interesting that, you know, it's one of those things where Marvel couldn't have planned this, but, you know, the fact that the post-Endgame story is one about the world going through a huge traumatic event, and then in 2020 the world went through a huge traumatic event, and we're all kind of dealing with that trauma in our own way.
It's why I thought WandaVision was so perfect for that very reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, like I said, there's no way they could have planned that.
No.
But just at the right time that their stories are dealing with trauma, the world is dealing with trauma, and, you know, and so there's so much for us to empathize with in these characters.
Yeah, and to do a little bit of self-plugging here, one of the things that we love to do on Kiss Your Franchise Goodbye is talk about these long-running franchises and look at them in the cultural zeitgeist that the film came out in. Snow White came out at a very specific time. James Bond, Dr. No came out at a very specific time. What was it saying about the culture? What was the sort of feedback loop that it created and the cultural conversation? And what does that mean, and why does it continue to have like reverberation today? Why are people still watching these movies? Why do they care about them? And I think people are going to look back on the MCU Phase 4 as this hallmark card of, whoa, this is what everybody was going through in like 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
And that's like a good read on it in a lot of ways, because even though it didn't start out that way, they obviously didn't plan that. It is what it ended up being. So I really like that take on She-Hulk as, you know, being another place where we are talking about mental health, because whenever we talk about a Hulk series of any kind, that is the part, at least part of the subtext.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, we're nearing the end of the show here, nearing the end of the episode. Jen finally heads back home, finally with Bruce's support.
Mm-hmm.
For real this time.
For real.
And so our flashback finally ends. We find out that Jen has basically told her family and her best friend Nikki, as opposed to her best friend Spandex, and has told us, you know, the audience. And she has one of those lines that you immediately know the gods of irony are going to call you out on, because she says, I was right, Bruce was wrong, and I never have to be a Hulk.
Yup.
And so we cut to the courtroom, and I know enough about the law to know that in closing arguments, it's supposed to be prosecution and then defense.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of breaking the rules here by having, you know, by seeing the end of the defense attorney's argument and then calling on Jen for her closing argument.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the MCU legal system works a little differently. You know, for dramatic purposes, it makes sense, so we'll go with it.
Yeah.
And just as Jen begins to talk, well, not the fourth wall, but a wall breaks. One of my favorite jokes from the comics is in a book called Damage Control.
Oh, yeah, Damage Control's great.
Which, you know, we've seen a version of them in the MCU, but they are the company that is that comes to clean up superhero fights. And Damage Control is on the scene when another fight happens to break out between She-Hulk and a couple of robots. And they're fighting and they're crashing through walls, and one of the guys in Damage Control is just standing back, and he goes, 1, 2, 3, and then, you know, they crash through another wall, and the entire building falls down around them, and the guy goes, it just goes to show what I always say, you break the fourth wall, the whole story falls apart.
That's a little on the nose, but I like it.
It is a little bit on the nose, but yeah,
good joke.
So yeah. That's the late great Dwayne McDuffie gave us that one.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I worship at the feet of Dwayne McDuffie.
Yeah. He's the one who created Damage Control.
Yeah.
So those were his words. But yeah, so a wall breaks through, and we never hear her name in this episode, but we know from all the promotional material and everything that this is Titania who comes in.
Jamila Jamil from The Good Place.
Oh, one of my favorite shows of all time.
Yep.
And I think probably next episode we'll get more with Titania, so I don't want to go too much into her comic book origins and such, but I'll just say her given name in the comics is Mary McPherson. I'm guessing they'll probably change that to reflects the actress's heritage instead.
Yeah.
And she came from the original Secret Wars storyline.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
She was a character who happened to be in Denver when it got transported to Battleworld. And so she was just kind of stuck on Battleworld and happened across Doctor Doom's fortress. And he said, "Hey, I'll give you superpowers if you come work for me." And she and her best friend became Titania and Volcana.
Okay.
I very much doubt that she'll have the same origin here, since we have had no Secret Wars in the MCU. Anyway, just to point out that even at this point, she is different from her comic book counterpart, but similar enough. You know, she's just a big, strong woman who loves attention and loves being a bully. And even from this brief moment, I think we get some of that from Jamila's performance here, especially with her costume choice. She's very, very flamboyant, I would say.
Yes.
She's very...
She's very extra, as the kids
yes.
say.
Yes. Although, you know, usually in the comics, a Titania She-Hulk fight is a long, drawn-out battle. They are very similar in strength levels to one another, and this seemed to be handled way quicker than I was expecting.
Yeah, well, I give Jennifer Walters points for, I think, the element of surprise. I think Titania is probably not expecting any sort of resistance like this. She's just, you know, crashing through walls, having fun, and then out of nowhere, suddenly she gets punched.
Yeah, well,
we'll see.
She was doing a flying kick.
Yeah.
And
right.
She-Hulk punches her right in the middle of that. But the fact that basically one punch and then hits the wall and is knocked out, I'll be curious to see if that's how they portray her strength levels for the rest of the show, or if they just wanted to get this fight in and done out of the way quickly. And so for the rest of the time, she'll actually be portrayed much more on She-Hulk's level.
Yeah. I'm interested in where they're going to go from here, too. I don't put it past them to have some sort of like superhero steroids or something that would let any of these folks power up a little bit more, especially since we know that there are these underground fight clubs that people keep fighting in, that we saw in Shang-Chi, and we saw Emil Blonsky fighting in Shang-Chi, so
who we're gonna see. We know we're gonna see here in She-Hulk. Yeah. So yeah, they could definitely tie that in. I also was thinking of the super soldier-ish serum from Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Yeah, and we know Sharon Carter's got her fingers all in that. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus, too, so
yep,
doing whatever she's doing, trying to gather up her Thunderbolts team. So that's going to get interesting.
Yeah. You know, so far this show is pretty separate. You know, obviously there's the tie-in to the Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
And we know there's going to be some tie-ins to other characters, but this first episode was very much separate and just telling Jen's story. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun as we bring in more comic book characters and get to see how they interact with the legal system in various ways.
Yeah.
Speaking of the legal system, I love how the closing credits are done like a courtroom sketch artist.
Yes.
It brings in her lawyerness. It brings in the fact that she's originally a comic book character, and so there's that kind of art style to it. And so, yeah, all of that together, that's just the perfect way to close out the show and to show us who she is in those final moments. But
we get a closing credits scene because it's
we
Marvel.
Do get a post-credits scene, and with the light-hearted style of this, you know, the fact that they're going more for comedy, I have to wonder if we're gonna get a post-credits joke in every or nearly every episode.
Wouldn't surprise me. I think that would be a lot of fun. Wouldn't be a bad thing to, you know, go back and put a little button on it.
Mm-hmm.
But especially because they called it out in the credits with her Jennifer making her presentation.
Her presentation,
to Bruce.
yes. Captain America,
The phone,
virgin.
Captain America, virgin. and
this is something the fans online have. I've seen debates about it.
oh yeah,
So
I've participated in debates about them, and I have a theory. This is not my headcanon. Here's my thing. Bruce doesn't know, and if he is, he's an unreliable narrator. I don't think Steve would have ever told Bruce about his sex life. I don't think Steve would have told anybody about his sex life.
Yeah, not. I mean, maybe he would eventually talk about it with Sam one night when they were drunk.
Maybe. Just and Bucky. I think Bucky
Yeah.
would be the only other person who would know.
Yeah. Sam and Bucky, I could see them basically broing out one night, or being men, as they probably
Yeah.
called it in the 40s.
Yes.
And yeah, so I could see him maybe telling one of them. And if Steve's told Sam, Sam told everybody.
Okay, that's probably true. Okay, that's probably true. Well, you know what happened is Sam told Luis, and then Luis told everybody. So,
Yeah.
Luis
Okay.
from Ant-Man.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. It got through the grapevine somehow.
Yeah.
So I will accept if Bruce gives a concrete, he says in this post-credit scene, he lost his virginity in 1943 to a USO girl.
Mhm.
If he's going to be that specific, he has knowledge somewhere.
I think that is
somebody
a
told
Howard
him.
Stark story that Howard told his son Tony,
Oh, that's interesting.
and that Tony has always believed that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I could totally see it. I could totally see that. Because, yeah, Tony would definitely... I mean, we know from this episode that Tony was bitching about Steve during the beach
Yeah.
house days
Yeah.
together. So, yeah, no, I could totally see Tony saying, yeah, my dad told me, he's not as sweet and pure as he pretends he is.
Well, so here's my theory, though, is that's a nice theory. It was a USO girl. I don't think that holds water because at the time, he was still, I think, crushing on Peggy Carter and hoping that something would happen post-war. And
Well,
so, my fan theory has always been that actually he lost his virginity to the waitress played by Ashley Johnson in Avengers, who she's like, Captain America saved my life. And then he went back to the cafe later. They flirted a little bit. She took him back to her apartment and thanked him very much. So
Okay.
that's that has always been my headcanon, that
mhm.
Ashley Johnson took Steve Rogers' virginity. Because I don't think 1940s Steve Rogers would have done it. And I think that Captain America in Avengers has big virgin energy. I think Captain America Winter Soldier, Steve, he's a little more confident. He's a little more in the pocket. So
Okay.
that's always been my fan theory. Now, if they're like, yes, this is now canon, then okay, I'm wrong. But that's my theory. And if you want me to write the fan fiction out, I will. Just
No, thank you. Anyways, I'm just gonna poke one hole in your fan theory there.
okay.
Which is that when Steve was touring with the USO, we get that montage.
Hmm.
And so we don't know how long that was, but it had to be at least months for him to travel around the country and then travel to Europe as part of that USO tour.
You're correct. Absolutely.
There is a long stretch of time where he was not interacting with Peggy at all, and at the same time was going from being unsure of himself in front of an audience to, he almost became like a smug version of himself by the end when we see him, lifting the motorcycle over his head with the big giant show and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I could totally see a Cap in that time period right there, near the end of the American leg of his tour, being hit on by one of the USO girls in the dance team and taking her home.
That's not without possibility. The whole point, though, is that we know that Captain America and we all,
to quote Jen,
agree.
Captain America
Yeah.
Marvel has been,
we all agree on that.
Marvel has been very good at cutting people off before they hit that hard K.
So that's such a perfect way to end that first episode too.
Yeah, like I said, that was the other moment that even after the third time through, I was still cracking up. Because her expression, her tone of voice, just everything. It was the perfect delivery of Captain America, and then cut to the music.
Love it.
Speaking of the music, that closing credits song is a banger, as the kids say.
As the kids say, that song slaps.
It's Who's That Girl by Eve.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's probably going to be the closing credits for the whole run. And if so, I'm looking forward to hearing it at least 8 more times, because that is a good song, and
works for me.
It fits the vibe of the show perfectly. So.
Yeah.
That wraps up my conversation with Andy this week. Of course, thank you to Andy Wilson, and be sure to check out the Kiss Your Franchise Goodbye podcast to get his thoughts on other MCU properties, as well as other long-standing film franchises. I'm so happy to be able to get these shows out while the episode we discussed is still the most recent episode available, and I'd love to be able to read some letters from listeners on what they think about each episode, so please join in the conversation by emailing me at welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to send in your comments anonymously. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcometogeektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show so we can all tell them,
Welcome to Geektown. Population, us.
Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Lovitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All of the sound clips of the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.